In the last few months alone, I have been a part of probably 20 conversations here on Swell about diversity and equity and inclusion. And all those conversations really grow me. They expand my mind. They help me understand the opportunities we all have to take part in these programs, these trainings, whether they be in organizations or in communities, centers, or in any place where people are gathering to create community. So today, in this conversation with April Powers, I really want to dig in to her role as the managing director of First Impressions RX, which is a consulting firm which helps companies do this. I want to look at her role as the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I also want to go into her exquisite work with Jubian Princess, which really helps people understand how to belong in communal spaces who don't normally feel welcome sometimes in those spaces. I want to talk about how it feels to be Black and Jewish in America right now. So I guess my first question, first of all, April, you've been a great Swellcaster so far. You've been in conversations, you've started conversations, and you're familiar with the power of conversation. So I know that we could start in one place and then it can go someplace else. And that's what's so exciting about these things. And we have time to think and we have time to stretch. So I'm excited to stretch with you. I know that you studied African American studies in college at UC Berkeley. And what's happening right now in Florida has assaulted so many of us, where they're not allowing the recognition of African American studies as something that's worthy of the rigor of academics. They're saying it's not valid. I want to start there because we're all freaking out about it a little bit. We're all saying, how can academic institutions just say an entire branch of study is not important? Can you speak to that experience when you heard about it first, as somebody who, first of all, enjoyed studying it, and second of all, is a Black American? How do you respond to something like that? And what kind of conversations have you already had about it? Because I'm sure you're in them now. And what can you share with us to elevate our own understanding of it and how we handle this, and especially people who are listening from Florida?
Deborah, thank you so much for starting this conversation. I'm excited and I'm bummed out and I'm hopeful all at the same time. I'm responding now from Sacramento, where I finished talking with some UC Davis students. And what I told them is, please vote. Please continue to show up even when you're not wanted there. Every little vote counts. The votes that we think are the least important and I'm not going to pay attention to this are the school board votes, are those local county official votes, because those are the ones that trickle up and impact something like this. And you think it doesn't matter, but it does. And racist things creep into the school programming without us knowing. And, horrible rules come in without us knowing, because slowly these votes are people ultimately at the end of the day, and they are creating a racist and white supremacist and ableist and homophobic curriculum by eliminating identifiers that would allow students to see themselves in history. I mean, if you're eliminating African American history, then what's next? All of it, right? And the contributions that folks make to the fabric of our society. And really, it's a dumbing down of America, starting with Florida. Because one of the things I focus on at First Impression RX is cultural competence. And cultural competence comes when you can understand other people. And the world studies us, and we don't take the time not all of us, take the time to study the world. And if we don't even understand ourselves and our history, we're not going to be able to improve or do better or really leverage the diversity that we are as a country. We welcomed everyone at some point, and now we're not doing as great of a job at that. But if we do have this melange of people in our country that include survivors of chattel slavery and their ancestors, right? Their descendants rather. We have an obligation to those folks and to everyone who comes to this country to understand that history. And more importantly, we owe it to white folks to allow them to understand why people are in need of this type of understanding. One of the things that really hit home for me when I was the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators is that when you're always the center of the story and the hero and the protagonist of the story, then you miss a lot. You always expect things to happen for you. You always expect to be the hero in the story, and it's really hard. You feel a certain kind of way when you realize, oh, you mean we weren't always the good guys? And I think that's a hard pill to swallow, but most of the rest of us have always lived these experiences. You know, I get Black History Month, and we get 28 days of sad stories. Jewish History Month, 28 days of sad stories. And we need Jewish joy, we need Black joy, we need Asian joy, we need LGBTQIA2P plus, Indigenous, and disabled joy, and we need to be able to see ourselves in the story. And for people who don't understand that, I'm sure this dialogue will continue to allow us to open that up a little bit more. But if you don't know your past in its full, with integrity, you are not going to have a good future. And we have seen this before. Students of history must know the full history, not just the myths that we are told, or we are doomed to fail as a society.
Wow, did you just hit me over the head with the joy issue? That's what I'm talking about. Like, with all the sadness of the history of the Blacks and the Jews, there are such rich histories that include the ebullience of artistry and culture and love and just the journeys the family has taken, and how the integrity of family itself is so strong in the Jewish and Black culture. And, I guess my follow-up question to all of this is, there are people who are so brave to confront those who are holding them back, and particularly students who feel that there's a huge gap in the courage of even their teachers and their administration and what they want to see happen in their classrooms. I'm talking about all the censorship. I'm talking about just the narrow-mindedness of some teachers. What advice would you give the courageous student, whether they're in high school or college, to, kind of formalize their intent to change the world around them? Is it always strength in numbers, or can you give me a sort of a playbook a little bit for the individual who just wants to make a difference in a conversation with somebody who they see as darkening their classroom with limitations? How do we guide that person? Let's just do it a person at a time, because we know there's a ton of organizations out there. There's a ton. In fact, sometimes I wonder, are they talking to each other enough? But let's look at the individual courageous person who wants to make a change in their little world, which can ripple, as you know. What's a playbook for somebody to bring forward an enlightened conversation without getting pointed at as someone who's rebelling? Let's start there.
I think students are actually really good at this age at organizing. And so I would organize boycotts. If your teachers and faculty are not doing what they need to do, every day that you're not in school is dollar signs to them. Every college where you say, you know what, I'm not going there. I refuse, there are going to be colleges that I will refuse to help my children pay for simply because of the politics in those organizations. New colleges are sprouting up. You're seeing fewer kids feeling like they need to go to college. I know that some of the business folks that I talk to say, the college degree for what? So they can indoctrinate these kids and have them come, to my place of business and not aware of the world or not understanding things, and they're, being indoctrinated into this thing and that thing. I think I love documentation, and I think there is strength in that. I don't love the gotcha moments and things, but I think we've all been woken up by seeing some of the things that are happening in classrooms that children are now documenting in real time for us that we as parents didn't have insight into. So, if you hear, there's that professor who was like doing the Nazi salute in class, or, in the Bay Area who just, the administration knew that he was teaching anti-Semitism and they didn't do anything about it. And then, of course, you see a brown face being anti-Semitic, but the administrators who allowed him to continue don't get showcased. And I'm always concerned about that, like black faces being trotted out for, things that they're not necessarily responsible for. I think Whoopi Goldberg is a great example. She was talking about Mouse being taken out of classrooms, and the administrators who pulled Mouse, who censored Mouse, should have been in the news, not her for not understanding history, because, again, American history is not taught at our schools. So I think students have to understand the dollar signs of what's going on and make decisions with their feet. Go to the campuses, do your research before you go to schools. I know it's very competitive out there, but you can still advocate for yourselves. Run for student government. Be noisy. Be the loud, rebellious youth that many of us have been.
A great answer. I love documentation as much as the next person, and I also think that people are so inclined to not trust anything anymore. Printed, in video, in photography, audio, there's just a crumbling of trust. And it's people's defense. They say, well, that's made up, even if it's in your face, because there's all this dystopian perspectives around, the source, and it's all relatively defendable because there's so many things that are generated that are not true. I want to shift gears for a second to the perception of what diaspora means to you, the word, because I have two sisters that live in Israel, so I am in the diaspora to them. As a black Jewish person, you must be sensitive to all sorts of senses of what people feel is their home, and where are they rooted, and where do they belong. And can you give us your experience first, and then also stretch out to what does diaspora mean to you? And what should we think about it in terms of inclusivity? And what should I relate to? How should I relate to it in reference to the state of Israel? My sisters joyfully moved there 35 years ago to feel at home, and they're so happy, and their children are so happy. And it just made me think when you were talking about, or when I was looking at your website about the concept of diaspora. So let's stretch into that. I'm not sure where it'll go, but thank you for being so responsive. And let's see where this goes.
Thank you for asking such a great question. I love the word diaspora. I love to say it. It sounds great in my mouth, but when I think about it, the first thing I honestly think about is violence, because I come from two diasporic people, one as a result of colonization in the ancient land of Israel and the biblical land of Israel, there was an act of colonization and violence and enslavement that happened in 70 CE with the Romans, and Jews were forced, and that wasn't the first time, but they were forced to finally flee altogether and or were taken as slaves into different parts of Europe. And of course, we know that the black slave trade kidnapped and enslaved millions of us and brought us here. And so it's one thing, there's one thing to be fleeing violence, and it's another thing to be stolen from your land and have that land stolen. Um, so being in diaspora makes me think of all the different ways that the African diaspora expresses itself globally. I think it's really beautiful to see people of African descent in South America and and in Europe and here in the U.S. and how we do Black, how we do African. And I think, Jewish people think of us as a white religious community. Jewish people are Indian, Asian, Black, African, Ethiopian, um, Latino. There's so many different faces of Jewish people in diaspora that most people don't acknowledge, Iranian, Mizrahi, Sephardic. We don't look like what you typically think of as white presenting Jew because of this violence, but because we've been forced to flee and we land in different parts of the world and we adopt those cultures. So diaspora is it's interesting to think about because some people feel safe and happy in diaspora, and other people have a longing to get back to their homeland, right? There was just a movement of successful Black women that are leaving the U.S. They don't see a future for them or their children here. I get that. As Black women, we're on the bottom rung of society here, and there's going to be a brain drain of people if we're not careful, of really smart, bright contributors to our world that are going to say, I'm in diaspora here. This isn't my home. I can do this anywhere else, and perhaps be treated better, and it's worth that risk.
I understand that it's connected to violence, and there's so much sorrow in the word for me. There's separation. There's a feeling of stretched emotions across large continents and vast waters. It's much easier now with WhatsApp and Swell and FaceTime. I was thinking while you were talking that I think the closest thing to feeling connected to a place and feeling like you have agency is having a voice. And the people that we're tragically losing are the people that say, I've used my voice, but my voice has not been heard. Or I've been in situations where my voice has not been integrated once it's been heard. Diversity of thought is different than diversity. When you have people that understand how to embrace as opposed to just tolerate, it's such a mindset. I'm thinking a lot out loud, which is what we're supposed to do, right? Thank you for being a constant voice here on Swell. You already have been here, and you're here now in this conversation, but I anticipate that you'll continue to be here. And this is just the beginning of this exploration, I think. I'd love to have some new voices come in. Perhaps you and I will invite some. I think it's really important to sort of obviously take advantage of who you are as somebody who has so many different lived experiences, to be able to share them and make us feel at home in the questions that we have, in the curiosity we have about your celebration, your sorrow, your joy, your disappointment, whatever you experience. But I think you this is your life. You've committed to this conversation, and we're all in it to some extent by listening to it. But the question is, how do we take it back to our worlds and and make a difference. And I hope that every day I get to talk, I get to poke in a little bit and see what people are feeling in a safe way, without avoiding discomfort, because the second people are avoiding discomfort is when we stop growing, I think. Thank you for this, and let's just see what new voices come in. Anybody here who wants to talk about their own experience from any perspective when it comes to celebrating inclusion in a community that feels exclusionary, that's what we're talking about here. Thanks.